Chapter 1. The Rival's Mistake. The autumn air bit at Bryn Ashford's cheeks as she stepped through the iron gates of Blackthorn Manor, the sprawling estate that served as neutral ground for the regional pack summit. She didn't belong here, not really. As a human liaison for the Department of Supernatural Affairs, she was meant to observe, document, and disappear into the background like furniture no one remembered to dust. But Bryn had never been good at being invisible. The voice dripped with contempt before Bryn even cleared the entrance hall. She turned to find a woman in her mid-20s, all sharp cheekbones and sharper eyes, dressed in leather that seemed designed to intimidate. Her auburn hair fell in deliberate waves over one shoulder, and the wolf tattoo on her collarbone pulsed faintly, a mark of pack affiliation. Bryn straightened her spine, refusing to shrink. Bryn Ashford, Department Liaison, Cassandra Thorne. The woman's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. I'm surprised they sent someone so... The word landed like a slap, but Bryn had endured worse. 3 years ago, she'd survived a car accident that killed her fiancé and left her with scars that ran deeper than the ones visible on her skin. Fragile? Maybe once. Not anymore. I'm here to do my job, not to impress you, Bryn said evenly. Cassandra's eyes flashed amber, a warning sign Bryn had learned to recognize. Shifters didn't like being challenged, especially not by humans. Cassandra sneered, circling Bryn like a predator sizing up prey. The accusation stung more than Bryn wanted to admit. She'd heard the rumors about human groupies who haunted shifter territories, begging to be turned or claimed. It made her work harder, her professional boundaries thicker. I'm not interested in your world beyond my assignment, Bryn replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She clutched her leather portfolio tighter, using it as both shield and anchor. Cassandra leaned closer, her breath hot against Bryn's ear. Then why do I smell fear on you? The voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk, deep, commanding, and utterly calm. Bryn's entire body reacted before her mind caught up, a shiver racing down her spine that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with something primal she couldn't name. Cassandra went rigid, her eyes widening before she took 3 deliberate steps backward. Alpha Kale. Bryn turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. The man standing in the doorway shouldn't have been real. He was tall, easily 6'3", with broad shoulders that filled his charcoal suit jacket in a way that suggested the expensive fabric was barely containing something wild beneath. His dark hair was slightly too long, falling across his forehead in a way that made him look more dangerous than polished. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold, storm gray with flecks of silver that seemed to glow in the dim light of the manor. Those eyes were fixed entirely on her. Alpha Kale Blackwood, he said, his gaze never leaving Bryn's face. The name meant nothing to her, but the weight of his presence meant everything. The air itself seemed to shift around him, charged with an authority that made even Cassandra, who moments ago had been all swagger and threat, look diminished. I apologize for my pack members' territorial behavior, Kale continued, moving into the room with the fluid grace of something not entirely human. Miss Ashford is here as an official observer. It took Bryn a moment to find her voice. Something flickered in Kale's expression. Amusement? Respect? Cassandra's jaw tightened. My apologies, Miss Ashford. She practically spat the words before turning on her heel and disappearing down the corridor, her retreat more strategic than apologetic. The silence that followed felt heavier than the confrontation itself. You should be careful, Kale said finally, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. Summit Week brings out the worst in some packs. Old rivalries, new alliances. I'm not a pawn, Bryn said, surprising herself with the edge in her tone. She'd spent 3 years rebuilding herself from the wreckage of her old life, and she refused to be treated like a victim or a tool. Kale's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. No. He studied her with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as if he could see past her professional armor to the scars she kept hidden. Bryn forced herself to meet his gaze, even as her pulse hammered in her throat. She asked. No, he agreed, taking a step closer. The space between them felt electric, charged with something Bryn had no name for. But I know her kind. Territory. The word should have sounded possessive, maybe even threatening. Instead, it felt like protection, like a promise. Bryn's rational mind screamed at her to step back, to maintain professional distance, to remember that shifters were her assignment, not her allies. But her body refused to cooperate, rooted to the spot as Kale moved even closer. He asked, "Room 7B." His eyes held hers for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Before Bryn could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the entrance hall with her heart racing and her carefully constructed professional detachment in shambles. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the erratic rhythm beneath her palm. This was exactly what she'd promised herself she wouldn't do, get drawn into their world, their drama, their dangerous gravity. But as she made her way to her assigned room, Bryn couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted the moment Cale Blackwood's eyes met hers. Something that felt disturbingly like fate. And fate, she'd learned the hard way, was never kind. Chapter 2. Moonlight and Secrets. Bryn couldn't sleep. She tried everything, counting backward from 100, breathing exercises, even the meditation app her therapist had recommended after the accident. Nothing worked. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw storm gray ones staring back at her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. She gave up, threw on her wool sweater over her sleep shirt, and grabbed her worn copy of Wuthering Heights. If she couldn't sleep, she might as well find somewhere quiet to read. The manor was massive enough that she could avoid running into anyone at this hour, or so she thought. The library was tucked away on the second floor, a sprawling room with floor-to-ceiling shelves and leather chairs positioned near a stone fireplace. Moonlight streamed through tall windows, casting silver shadows across the Persian rugs. Bryn had discovered it earlier during her initial tour and had immediately fallen in love with the smell of old paper and wood smoke. She pushed open the heavy oak door as quietly as possible, and froze. Cale Blackwood stood by the window, one hand braced against the frame, staring out at the forest beyond. He'd shed his suit jacket, and his white dress shirt was rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with scars that told stories she'd probably never hear. His entire posture radiated tension, as if he were holding himself together through sheer force of will. Bryn should have left, should have backed out silently and found somewhere else to hide from her insomnia. But something in the set of his shoulders, the lonely curve of his silhouette, made her hesitate. She heard herself say. Cale turned so quickly she almost startled, but his expression softened when he saw her. "Miss Ashford." "Call me Bryn." She stepped fully into the room, clutching her book like a talisman. He tested her name like he was tasting something rare. "I'm the same." She moved toward one of the chairs near the dormant fireplace, trying to ignore how her body seemed hyper-aware of his presence. He said it like a curse. Every pack has an agenda. Every alpha wants something. Bryn sat, tucking her legs beneath her. Cale was silent for a long moment, then moved away from the window to take the chair across from hers. Up close, she could see the shadows under his eyes, the faint lines of stress around his mouth. Whatever burden he carried, it was heavy. "Obligation," he said finally. "My pack depends on these connections, even if I find them tiresome. And there are—" The way he said it, weighted with meaning, made Bryn's pulse quicken. His lips quirked. "Does it?" He leaned back in his chair, studying her with that same unsettling intensity from earlier. "What about you? Is that what you are?" The admission should have frightened her. Instead, it sent a thrill down her spine that she absolutely refused to examine. "I'm good at my job," she said, lifting her chin. She offered a small smile. The words slipped out before she could stop them. She never talked about David, not with colleagues, not with friends, certainly not with mysterious shifter alphas she'd met hours ago. Kael's expression shifted, something like understanding passing over his features. "He died 3 years ago." Bryn's fingers tightened on her book. "I was driving." She trailed off, swallowing hard. "He died instantly." She didn't know why she was telling him this. Maybe it was the late hour, or the moonlight, or the strange sense that Cale would understand what it meant to carry weight you couldn't put down. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, and the sincerity in his voice nearly undid her. "Loss is... it changes us." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. I lost someone too. Bryn's chest tightened. The word felt strange on her tongue, too intimate, too loaded with meaning in the shifter world. But Kael didn't flinch. No. He said it simply, but she heard the grief beneath. He was killed defending our territory 2 years ago. I was supposed to be with him, but I'd left that morning to scout the northern border. It was too late, Bryn finished softly. They sat in silence, two people bound by different losses, but the same understanding. That survivor's guilt was a special kind of torture, one that whispered you should have died instead. Bryn asked. Kael leaned forward, elbows on his knees, closing the distance between them. It doesn't get easier, but you get stronger. Their eyes met, and something passed between them that felt like recognition, like finding someone who spoke a language only grief could teach. Bryn whispered. His voice was rough, almost reluctant, as if the admission cost him something. And maybe you remind me that there's still softness in the world. Bryn's breath caught. She should create distance, should remember her professional boundaries, should do anything except lean forward like her body had a mind of its own. Kael, a howl split the night, long, mournful, and far too close. Kael was on his feet instantly, every muscle tensed, his eyes flashing that eerie silver gray. He moved toward the door with inhuman speed, then paused, looking back at her. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone except me. Fear spiked through her. Good. His expression softened fractionally. Trust me, Bryn. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the moonlit library with her racing heart and the echo of a howl that sounded disturbingly like a warning. Chapter 3. The Beast in the Woods. Bryn didn't lock the door. She told herself it was because she needed to know what was happening, that her job required her to document any incidents during the summit. But the truth sat heavier in her chest. She was worried about Kael, which was insane. He was an alpha werewolf who could probably tear apart a grizzly bear with his bare hands. He didn't need a human woman with trust issues and a limp worrying about him. Still, she found herself moving to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass as she searched the darkness beyond. The manor's grounds stretched into dense forest, the trees thick enough to hide an army. Moonlight painted everything in shades of silver and shadow, beautiful and treacherous. Movement caught her eye. A massive shape racing through the trees. Too large to be a normal wolf, too fluid to be anything but supernatural. Then another shape, and another, until at least 5 wolves were visible, circling something Bryn couldn't see, her heart hammered against her ribs. This was what Kael had gone to face. She pressed closer to the window, her breath fogging the glass. One of the wolves broke from the pack, darker than the others, larger, with eyes that seemed to glow even from this distance. It moved with authority, with purpose, positioning itself between the other wolves and... Was that a person? Bryn squinted, trying to make sense of the scene. Yes, someone was on the ground, either injured or unconscious. The dark wolf stood over them protectively while the others stalked closer, their body language aggressive. This wasn't a hunt. This was a confrontation. Without thinking, Bryn grabbed her phone and ran. The logical part of her brain screamed that this was suicide, that humans didn't intervene in shifter disputes, that she was going to get herself killed. But something stronger overrode logic, a pull she couldn't name, a certainty that she needed to be there. The autumn air hit her like a slap as she burst through the manor's rear entrance. The forest was darker up close, the trees forming a canopy that blocked most of the moonlight, but she could hear them now, snarls and growls that made her blood run cold. Kael's voice, rough and furious, echoed through the trees. She crashed through the underbrush, following the sound, her ankle protesting with each step. Then she broke into a clearing and froze. Kael stood in half shadow, his shirt torn, blood on his knuckles, facing down 3 wolves that circled him like sharks. On the ground behind him lay a young woman, maybe 18 or 19, unconscious and bleeding from a gash across her shoulder. The wolves were massive, their fur ranging from gray to rust red, their eyes reflecting the moonlight with an unnatural glow, and they looked hungry. Well, well, one of them said, actually spoke, its voice distorted but unmistakably female. The Northern Ridge Alpha brought a pet human to the summit. How? Cassandra. Even in wolf form, Bryn recognized the cruel amusement in her voice. Kale's hands clenched into fists, and Bryn saw something terrifying flash across his face, barely controlled rage that made the air itself feel heavier. This doesn't concern you, Cassandra. She's a rogue, another wolf snarled. No pack, no alpha. There's no such thing as fair game on neutral ground, Kale said, his voice dropping to something that made Bryn's instincts scream danger. Cassandra's wolf form prowled closer. I don't see your pack here to back you up, Kale. Just you. All three wolves turned their attention to Bryn simultaneously. She should have been terrified, should have run. Instead, she stepped forward, positioning herself beside Kale. Bryn, don't... Kale started, but she cut him off. She's injured. Bryn's voice shook, but she held her ground. Cassandra's laugh was a horrible sound, half human, half animal. Brave little thing, isn't she? Tell me, Kyle, does she know what you really are? The single word cracked through the clearing like thunder. Kyle moved, and Bryn's mind couldn't quite process what she saw. One moment he was beside her, human and furious. The next, his body seemed to blur, to shift, bones cracking and reforming too quickly for her eyes to follow. Dark fur erupted across his skin, his face elongating into something between man and beast. But he didn't complete the transformation. Instead, he stood there, caught between forms, more monster than man, and the raw power radiating from him made the other wolves cower. I am Cale Blackwood, he growled, and his voice was wrong, layered with something ancient and absolutely terrifying. Alpha of the Northern Ridge Pack, direct descendant of the first wolves. The air crackled with energy. Bryn felt it against her skin like static electricity, raising every hair on her arms. This was dominance made tangible, power that demanded submission. Cassandra's wolf form shrank back, her ears flattening. The other two wolves had already dropped to their bellies, whining. This isn't over, Cassandra managed, but there was no strength in the words. Then she and her companions fled into the forest, leaving only the echo of paws against earth. Kale held his half-shifted form for another heartbeat, making sure they were truly gone. Then he collapsed to his knees, shaking as his body forced itself back to human. The transformation looked painful, like every cell was fighting to remember its proper shape. Bryn dropped beside him without hesitation, her hands hovering over his shoulders, unsure where it was safe to touch. Kale? Shouldn't... His voice was ragged, barely human. Shouldn't... Well, I am here. She grabbed his face between her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. Breathe. His storm-gray eyes focused on hers, and something in them looked lost, vulnerable. I'm not, Bryn said, and realized it was true. She'd just watched him become something out of nightmares, something that should have sent her screaming. Instead, all she felt was concern for the man trembling beneath her hands. You should be, he whispered. Behind them, the girl, Mira, groaned softly, reminding them both why they were there. Bryn forced herself to move, to check the girl's pulse and examine the wound. She needs medical attention. Kale nodded, his breathing still uneven but steadying. He scooped Mira into his arms with impossible gentleness, cradling her against his chest. Stay close to me. She won't, Bryn said with more confidence than she felt. As they made their way back to the manor, Bryn's mind raced with 1,000 questions, but only one mattered. Who exactly was Cale Blackwood, and why did his secrets feel like they were designed specifically to break her heart? Chapter 4. Wounds That Don't Heal. The manor's infirmary smelled of antiseptic and cedarwood, a strange combination that somehow fit the supernatural world Bryn was learning to navigate. She sat in a hard-backed chair, watching as Dr. Helena Carver, a silver-haired shifter with gentle hands and knowing eyes, stitched up Mira's shoulder wound. Cale stood by the window, still as a statue, his back to them all. He hadn't spoken since they'd carried Mira inside, hadn't looked at Bryn. The distance felt deliberate, like he was already building walls between them. She'll be fine, Dr. Carver said softly, tying off the last stitch. The wound was clean, claws, not teeth. She's lucky. Mira stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked young up close, with freckles across her nose and dark hair matted with sweat and blood. When she saw Kael, something like relief and terror crossed her face simultaneously. "Alpha Blackwood," she whispered. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to—" "Rest," Kael said, his voice gentler than Bryn expected. "You're safe now." Dr. Carver pulled a blanket over Mira and gestured for Bryn and Kael to follow her into the hallway. Once the door closed, the doctor's expression hardened. "That girl is terrified, Kael." He finally turned and Bryn's breath caught. He looked exhausted, haunted, like whatever he'd done in the forest had cost him more than just physical energy. "She and her hunting party were tracking Mira," Dr. Carver asked. "Her pack was destroyed 6 months ago." Kael's jaw tightened. "She's been surviving on her own ever since." His eyes flicked to Bryn for just a moment. Dr. Carver studied him with an expression Bryn couldn't quite read. "You're collecting strays, Kael. First that human liaison," she nodded toward Bryn, "and now a packless wolf." The doctor sighed, then touched his arm briefly, a gesture that seemed both fond and concerned. "Get some rest, both of you." As Dr. Carver disappeared back into the infirmary, Bryn found herself alone with Kael in the dim hallway. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. "You're hurt," Bryn said finally, noticing the way he favored his left side. She stepped closer, refusing to back down. "You saved that girl's life. You protected me." Something in his expression cracked. He looked at her like he wanted to argue, to maintain distance, to keep pretending he didn't need anyone. Then his shoulders sagged slightly, and he nodded. They found an empty sitting room down the hall, smaller than the library, with a couch and a single lamp casting warm light. Kael lowered himself onto the couch with a barely suppressed wince, and Bryn knelt beside him. "Shirt," she said, keeping her voice clinical even as her heart raced. He hesitated, then slowly unbuttoned his ruined dress shirt. When he shrugged it off, Bryn had to force herself not to gasp. His torso was a canvas of old scars, some thin and white with age, others newer and still pink. Claw marks, bite wounds, what looked like burns. Each one told a story of violence, of battles fought and survived. But it was the fresh bruising along his ribs that made her fingers hover uncertainly. "It's not as bad as it looks," Kael said quietly. Bryn gently pressed her fingertips against his ribs, testing for breaks. He hissed in pain. "Cracked, at least. Maybe broken. You should let Dr. Bum—" His hand caught hers, stopping her exploration. His skin was warm, almost feverish. "If I go back there, if she runs tests—" Bryn met his eyes. "The kind that would make me a target." He released her hand, but didn't look away. "The partial shift," Bryn said, remembering the terrifying beauty of his transformation. "Most wolves can't do that." He trailed off, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "My family isn't just descended from the first wolves. We are first wolves, the original bloodline, unchanged and undiluted. It makes us stronger, but it also makes us—" Bryn absorbed this, pieces clicking together. "That's why Cassandra backed down. It wasn't just your position as alpha." Kael's expression was bleak. "And it's why I can never let my guard down. There are packs who would kill to possess that bloodline. Others who would see me dead to prevent it from spreading." She understood now why he seemed so isolated, so guarded. He wasn't just an alpha carrying the weight of his pack. He was a living relic, a target, a secret that could get him killed. Bryn asked softly. The word felt strange on her tongue again, but Kael's reaction was immediate, a flash of pain so raw it made her chest ache. "I had someone once," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah. We were supposed to bond during the next full moon." Kael's hands clenched into fists. "There was an ambush. My father and Sarah were scouting the northern border when they were attacked by wolves from the Redmore pack. They wanted our territory, our bloodline." He closed his eyes. Bryn's throat tightened. She knew that kind of loss, the kind that hollowed you out and left you wondering why you survived when others didn't. Without thinking, she reached up and touched his face, her palm against his cheek. "I'm sorry." Kael's eyes opened, storm gray and turbulent. Don't look at me like that. Like you understand. His voice roughened. Because if you do, Bryn, I won't be able to stay away from you. Her heart hammered. But even as he said it, his hand came up to cover hers, holding her palm against his skin. His thumb traced the inside of her wrist, and she felt her pulse jump beneath his touch. Because the moment I do, everything changes. The confession hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to face. Bryn's rational mind screamed warnings, but her heart, her traitorous, wounded heart, whispered something different. Maybe they were both too broken for this to work. Maybe the distance between their worlds was too vast to bridge. But maybe, just maybe, broken things could fit together in ways that made them whole. Chapter 5. The Summit's Shadow. Morning came too quickly, bringing with it the harsh reality of pack politics and the first official summit session. Bryn dressed carefully in her charcoal suit, armor against a world that didn't want her there. Her reflection showed the sleepless night in the shadows under her eyes, but also something else, a flush to her cheeks, a brightness that hadn't been there before. She touched her wrist where Kael's thumb had traced her pulse, and her skin still tingled with the memory. Stop it, she told herself firmly. You have a job to do. Professional distance. Remember? But professional distance felt impossible when she entered the grand conference hall and immediately found Kael across the room. He stood with a group of alphas, dressed in a black suit that made him look every inch the dangerous predator he was. Their eyes met for a heartbeat, and the world seemed to pause. Then Cassandra stepped between them, deliberately breaking the connection. Cassandra's smile was all teeth, no warmth. I trust you slept well after your... Bryn forced herself to remain calm. Well enough. How about you? Several nearby shifters turned to stare. Cassandra's smile froze, her eyes flashing amber. Careful, human. You're only here on sufferance. Bryn stepped closer, surprising herself with her own boldness. But we both know you won't, because if you do, you'll have to explain to the Summit Council why you violated neutral ground laws. For a moment, Cassandra looked like she wanted to shift right there and tear Bryn's throat out. Then a man's voice cut through the tension. Cassandra. The speaker was tall and broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked auburn hair and eyes that matched Cassandra's. He wore authority like a second skin, and when he looked at Bryn, she felt assessed and dismissed in the span of a heartbeat. Alpha Marcus, Cassandra said, her entire demeanor shifting to submission. As Cassandra followed her alpha away, another voice spoke near Bryn's ear. She turned to find a woman about her age with warm brown skin and kind eyes, dressed in a burgundy dress that somehow looked both elegant and comfortable. The woman laughed softly. I'm Amara Chen, beta of the Crescent Moon Pack. Bryn Ashford. You stood up to Cassandra Thorne twice in 12 hours and lived to tell about it. Amara's smile was genuine. Before Bryn could respond, a gong sounded, calling everyone to their seats. The conference hall was set up like a courthouse, with the Council of Elder Alphas at the front and the various packs arranged in semicircles facing them. Bryn took her assigned seat in the observer section, her laptop ready to document the proceedings. Kael sat with the other alphas in the front row, but even from a distance, Bryn could feel the weight of his presence. Several times during the opening remarks, she caught him glancing back at her, his expression unreadable. The session began with territorial disputes, endless debates about borders and hunting rights that made Bryn's head swim. But she dutifully took notes, documenting everything as required by her position. Then the atmosphere shifted. We must address the rogue situation, Alpha Marcus said, standing. His voice carried easily through the hall. There has been an increase in packless wolves, some fleeing persecution, others simply refusing to submit to Alpha authority. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled shifters. I propose a new law, Marcus continued. Any wolf found without pack affiliation will be given two choices: join an existing pack or be, the euphemism was clear, removed meant killed. Bryn's stomach turned. She thought of Mira, barely 18 and already marked for death simply because she'd survived when her pack hadn't. That's barbaric, she said before she could stop herself. The entire hall went silent. Dozens of predatory eyes turned toward her. Miss Ashford, one of the council members said, his voice dripping with condescension. Bryn stood, her legs shaking but her voice steady. You're talking about executing people for the crime of being alone. for surviving when others didn't. It's pack law, Marcus said coldly. Bryn's hands clenched at her sides. Kale's voice cut through the hall like a blade. He stood, turning to face the council. Miss Ashford raises a valid point. This proposed law is too broad, too harsh. Not all rogues are threats. Marcus scoffed. Or infiltrators? Spies from rival packs? We cannot afford to be soft, Blackwood. I'm not suggesting we be soft. Kale's gaze swept the room. Create a process. Allow rogues to petition for asylum with packs willing to take them, another alpha asked. I would, Kale said simply. The hall erupted into chaos. Alphas shouting, council members demanding order, the air thick with aggressive energy. But Bryn only had eyes for Kale, who stood alone against the tide of opposition, willing to make himself a target to protect the vulnerable. Just like he'd done for her, just like he'd done for Mira. This is exactly why your bloodline is dying out, Blackwood, Marcus called over the noise. You're weak, sentimental. Kale went very still. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. My father taught me that strength without mercy is just cruelty. The challenge was unmistakable. Marcus's eyes flashed, his body tensing as if preparing to shift. Careful, boy. You may have ancient blood, but you're still alone. No pack to back you, no mate to strengthen you. Bryn was moving before she fully registered what she was doing. She walked down the aisle, past staring shifters, until she stood beside Kale. The silence that followed was deafening. Kale looked down at her, something like panic and wonder warring in his expression. Bryn, what are you... Making a choice, she said softly, then louder, addressing the room. I'm a human. I don't have claws or fangs or supernatural power, but I do have a voice, and I'm using it to say this law is wrong. Amara was the first to stand. Then another alpha stood, and another. Not all of them, maybe only a third of the room, but enough that Marcus's expression darkened with barely suppressed rage. This isn't over, Marcus said, looking between Kale and Bryn with undisguised hostility. As the session dissolved into recess, Kale caught Bryn's arm and pulled her toward a side corridor. Once they were alone, he pressed her against the wall, his hands on either side of her head, his face inches from hers. His voice was rough with emotion. You just made yourself a target. Let him, Bryn said, her heart racing. I meant what I said. But even as he said it, his forehead dropped to rest against hers, and Bryn felt the tremor that ran through him. Takes one to know one, she whispered. Kale's laugh was shaky. Then his hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. Bryn's hands found his chest, feeling his heartbeat racing as fast as hers. His eyes searched hers. Tell me to stop. But Bryn had spent 3 years playing it safe, building walls, keeping everyone at arm's length. And this man, this impossible, complicated, dangerous man, made her want to be brave again. It probably is a terrible idea, she admitted. Kyle's breath caught. You do matter. The confession hung between them, loaded with promise and danger in equal measure. Neither of them moved, caught in that perfect, terrible moment before everything changed forever. Chapter 6: Secrets in the Moonlight. The rest of the summit day passed in a blur of hostile stares and whispered conversations. Bryn felt the weight of every shifter's attention like physical pressure against her skin. She'd crossed a line by speaking out, and everyone knew it. Everyone except Amara, who found Bryn during the lunch break and pressed a cup of tea into her hands. You've got guts, Amara said, settling into the chair beside her in the Manor's sunroom. Bryn managed a weak smile. Marcus is dangerous, Bryn. Amara's expression grew serious. I didn't mean to make anyone look weak, Bryn paused, searching for the right words. I couldn't stay silent. Like Mira, Bryn confirmed. She's just a kid, Amara. Amara studied her with those kind, knowing eyes. You care about them. The rogues, the outcasts. The question hit deeper than Bryn expected. She stared into her tea, watching steam curl upward. Because I know what it's like to survive when everyone else dies. To be marked by loss and have people look at you like you're broken. Your fiancé, Amara said softly. Everyone blamed me, his parents, our friends. Bryn's throat tightened. I lost my job, my apartment, most of my relationships. I had to start over completely. Amara reached over and squeezed her hand. That's not stupid, Bryn. Before Bryn could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Meet me in the garden at sunset. Come alone. K. Her heart leapt. She shouldn't go, should maintain professional boundaries, should remember that getting involved with Cale Blackwood was a complication she couldn't afford. But when sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Bryn found herself walking through the manor's formal gardens, following a stone path that led to a secluded alcove surrounded by climbing roses and ancient oaks. Kyle stood waiting, silhouetted against the dying light. He'd changed from his suit into dark jeans and a gray Henley that somehow made him look more dangerous than formal wear ever could. When he turned and saw her, his expression shifted through relief, hunger, and something that looked almost like pain. You came, he said. Bryn stopped a few feet away, maintaining space even as everything in her wanted to close the distance. Cale moved closer, and Bryn caught the scent of him, pine and smoke and something wild. I needed to see you, to explain what happened today. His voice was rough. Because I don't think you understand how pack politics work, how grudges get carried, how humans who interfere in shifter business tend to... The threat wasn't subtle, and fear coiled in Bryn's stomach. But stronger than fear was anger. Cale's hands clenched at his sides like he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. Marcus won't forget what you did, and Cassandra already hates you. You've made enemies, Bryn. The word came out almost desperate. You're human, fragile. One careless claw, one bite, and... He stopped, his jaw working. I can't lose someone else. Understanding crashed over Bryn. This wasn't about her being reckless. This was about Cale's terror of experiencing that loss again, of watching someone he cared about die because he couldn't protect them. Sarah, she said softly. Cale flinched like she'd struck him. She died because I wasn't there. Because I made a choice to scout the northern border instead of staying with her and my father. His voice broke. The pack that attacked them, they knew our patrol routes, knew when we'd be vulnerable. It was an ambush specifically designed to draw me away, and I fell for it. Bryn closed the distance between them, unable to bear the agony in his expression. That wasn't your fault. Cale's hands came up to frame her face, and she could feel them trembling. I'm an alpha. I'm supposed to protect my pack, my family, the people I love, and I failed. His forehead dropped to rest against hers, and Bryn felt her breath catch. I told myself I'd stay away, that I wouldn't let anyone get close again. His thumb traced her cheekbone, the touch achingly gentle. It's not the mate bond. I'd know if it was, but it's something. A pull. Bryn's hands found his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palms. I feel it too. Cale's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Because everyone I've ever loved has been taken from me. My mother died when I was 12. My father and Sarah 2 years ago. I'm poison, Bryn. Or maybe, Bryn said, her own voice shaking, you've just had terrible luck. She smiled despite the tears burning in her eyes. Cale's laugh was broken, but genuine. Then his hands tightened on her face, his eyes searching hers with desperate intensity. Tell me to walk away. It is madness, Bryn agreed. But I'm tired of being safe, tired of hiding from anything that might hurt. I died in that car accident 3 years ago, Cale. It's true. She pressed closer, until barely any space remained between them. And then I met you, and for the first time in 3 years I wanted to live again. Her name on his lips sounded like prayer and profanity combined. If we do this, if we cross this line, there's no going back. You'll be marked as mine in the eyes of every shifter at this summit. They'll see you as leverage, as weakness. She rose on her toes, bringing her lips within inches of his. For a heartbeat, Kyle held perfectly still, balanced on a knife's edge between restraint and surrender. Then something in him snapped, and his mouth crashed against hers with the force of a man who'd been denying himself too long. The kiss was everything Bryn had feared and hoped for. Desperate, consuming, tasting of loneliness and longing and the terrible relief of finally coming home. Cale kissed her like she was air and he'd been drowning, his hands sliding into her hair, tilting her head to deepen the connection. Bryn's fingers clutched his shirt, pulling him closer, needing more even as her rational mind screamed warnings she no longer cared to hear. This was reckless, dangerous, possibly the worst decision she'd ever made. But when Cale pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against hers, both of them breathing hard, Bryn knew with absolute certainty that she'd make the same choice 1,000 times over. "No going back," he whispered against her lips. "No going back," she agreed. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the garden, something howled, a sound that promised consequences neither of them were prepared to face. Chapter 7. The Price of Defiance. Cale tensed instantly, his body shifting into predator mode. He pulled Bryn behind him, his eyes scanning the darkening tree line. His voice had taken on that rough edge that meant his wolf was close to the surface. Or a challenge. Before Bryn could respond, 3 wolves emerged from the shadows, massive creatures with rust-red fur and eyes that glowed amber in the twilight. They didn't approach, just stood at the garden's edge, watching, waiting. "Silvercrest Scouts," Cale said quietly. A shiver ran down Bryn's spine that had nothing to do with the evening chill. Cale's hand found hers, his fingers interlacing with her own. The gesture was possessive, protective, and unmistakably public. "Come on." They walked back to the manor slowly, deliberately, with Cale's body positioned to shield her from the watching wolves. Bryn could feel their eyes tracking every step, and she forced herself to keep her chin up, her stride steady. Fear would only make her look like prey. The moment they stepped inside, Cale pulled her into a side corridor, pressing her against the wall, but this time there was nothing romantic about it. His eyes were wild, more wolf than man, and his breathing came in harsh pants. "I need you to listen very carefully," he said, his hands on her shoulders. "What we just did in the garden, it wasn't private. Marcus made sure we had an audience." The words sent conflicting emotions through Bryn, possessive heat and feminist outrage warring in her chest. "Not like that." Cale's expression was agonized. "But in shifter culture, public displays of affection are declarations. By kissing you where others could witness it, I've essentially announced that you're under my protection, that you're—" His hands tightened on her shoulders. "Marcus will see this as an opportunity. If he can get to you, hurt you, he hurts me. He proves I'm weak." Bryn's heart raced, but not entirely from fear. "You stay close to me, you don't go anywhere alone, and you—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "You should probably leave. Go back to the city, file your report remotely." She pushed against his chest, forcing him to step back. "You don't get to kiss me like that and then send me away for my own good. I'm an adult, Cale." She met his eyes steadily. "I told you I was tired of just existing. Well, that means taking risks, making choices that matter." Cale looked at her like she was something precious and terrifying. "Good." Bryn reached up and touched his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. "Now tell me what else I need to know." He closed his eyes briefly, leaning into her touch. "The full moon is in 3 days. During Summit Week, there's always a moon run. All the packs hunt together in the forest." "It is." Cale opened his eyes, and the look in them made her breath catch. "I'll have to participate. As an alpha, I don't have a choice. But you'll be vulnerable." "She's not strong enough yet." Cale's expression darkened. "Which means she'll need protection too." A plan began forming in Bryn's mind. "Then we give her protection. Mira stays in my room during the run. We lock the door. We don't answer for anyone except you or Dr. Carver." Kyle looked relieved and worried in equal measure. "But Bryn, if something goes wrong during the run, if Marcus makes his move, I won't be able to get back quickly." She squeezed his hand. "But I also understand that hiding won't keep me safe. Marcus has already marked me as a threat." Footsteps echoed in the corridor, and they sprang apart just as Amara rounded the corner. She took one look at them, Bryn's flushed face, Cale's protective stance, and her eyebrows rose. "Well," Amara said, barely suppressing a smile, "I was coming to warn you that Marcus is looking for you both, but I see you've been—" Cale ran a hand through his hair. "Amara, don't explain." But her expression grew serious. "You should know that Marcus is calling an emergency council session tomorrow morning. He's pushing for an immediate vote on the rogue law." Kael's hands clenched into fists. "He knows if we have time, we can change minds." Amara asked quietly. Amara nodded, then looked at Bryn. You should also know that Cassandra is spreading rumors about you, saying you're using feminine wiles to manipulate Alpha Blackwood. Anger flashed hot and bright in Bryn's chest. Of course it is. Amara's expression was sympathetic. I'm sorry, Bryn, but you need to be prepared. After Amara left, Bryn and Kale stood in the corridor, the weight of tomorrow's battle settling over them like a shroud. I should walk you to your room, Kale said finally. They walked in silence, hands occasionally brushing but not quite holding. When they reached her door, Kale did a thorough check of the room, windows, locks, even under the bed. It would have been almost funny if the threat weren't so real. I'll be right down the hall, he said, lingering in the doorway. Bryn managed a smile. Try to get some sleep. Kale crossed back to her in 2 strides, cupping her face and kissing her forehead with such tenderness it made her throat ache. I meant what I said earlier. You matter. He held her gaze for a long moment, something complicated and vulnerable in his expression. Then he forced himself to step back, to leave, closing the door between them with visible reluctance. Alone in her room, Bryn leaned against the door and let out a shaky breath. Her lips still tingled from their kiss in the garden. Her heart still raced with the memory of his hands in her hair, his desperate confession against her mouth. She'd promised herself she wouldn't get involved, wouldn't risk her heart again, wouldn't let anyone matter enough to hurt her, but Cale Blackwood had shattered those promises without even trying. And now she was standing on the edge of something terrifying and exhilarating, knowing that tomorrow might bring consequences she couldn't predict. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You should have left when you had the chance, human. Now you'll learn what happens to those who interfere in pack business. M. Marcus. Bryn's hands trembled as she screenshotted the message and forwarded it to Cale. His response came immediately. I'm on my way. Within seconds, she heard his footsteps in the hallway. When she opened the door, he looked at her phone, then at her face, and something fierce and protective blazed in his eyes. Cale stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Bryn considered lying, but they were past that now. Yes. He moved to the chair by the window, settling into it like he planned to keep watch all night. Sleep, Bryn. She should have protested, should have worried about propriety or what people would think. Instead, she climbed into bed, fully clothed, and watched Cale's silhouette against the window. Guardian, protector, and something far more dangerous to her carefully guarded heart. Thank you, she whispered. Always, he promised. And despite everything, the threats, the danger, the impossible situation they'd created, Bryn felt safer than she had in years. Chapter 8. Trial by Counsel. Dawn came too soon, painting Bryn's room in shades of pale gold. She woke to find Cale still in the chair by the window, though his head had tilted back in exhausted sleep. In the morning light, he looked younger somehow, the harsh lines of worry smoothed away, his guard finally down. Bryn sat up quietly, studying him. Even in sleep, one of his hands rested on the arm of the chair in a loose fist, ready to spring into action at the slightest threat. He'd spent the entire night protecting her, denying himself rest to keep her safe. Her chest tightened with an emotion she wasn't quite ready to name. As if sensing her gaze, Kael's eyes opened, instantly alert, no grogginess or confusion, pure predator instinct. But when he saw her, his expression softened. Morning, he said, his voice rough from disuse. I don't need much sleep during summit week. He stood, rolling his shoulders to work out the stiffness. Nervous, scared, a smile ghosted across his lips. The casual endearment sent warmth flooding through her. My girl. Like she belonged to him. Like he belonged to her. Like they were already something more than 2 people drawn together by impossible circumstances. Cale, Bryn started, then hesitated. What happens if Marcus wins today? His expression darkened. Then rogues like Mira have 30 days to find a pack or face execution. He crossed to her, crouching beside the bed so they were eye level. I told you. I can't stand by and watch innocent people die. Not again. Bryn reached out and traced the line of his jaw, feeling the stubble rough against her fingertips. You carry so much weight. His hand covered hers, pressing her palm against his cheek. But last night, watching you sleep, knowing you trusted me enough to let your guard down, it reminded me why I carry it. Because there are people worth protecting. The confession was raw, unguarded. Before Bryn could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. They sprang apart as Amara's voice called through the door. Bryn, Kale, the emergency session starts in 30 minutes. Kale stood, his expression shifting back to the alpha mask. Controlled, commanding, dangerous. After he left to change, Bryn dressed carefully in her most professional suit, navy blue, severe lines, armor against judgment. She twisted her hair into a tight bun and applied minimal makeup, trying to look competent rather than seductive. Let Cassandra spread her rumors. Bryn would show the council exactly who she was. The conference hall buzzed with tension when she arrived. Every seat was filled, shifters standing along the walls when space ran out. The air felt electric, charged with aggressive energy barely held in check. Bryn found her observer seat, hyper-aware of the stares following her movement. Whispers rippled through the crowd, some curious, some hostile, all assessing. Chapter 9, Before the Storm. The hours after the council session blurred together in a haze of preparation and dread. Kyle disappeared with members of his pack who'd arrived to support him. Wolves Bryn hadn't even known were at the summit. Apparently, he'd called them the moment Marcus issued the challenge. Bryn found herself in her room with Amara and Mira, the three of them bound together by their connection to Kyle and their fear for what tomorrow would bring. He'll win, Mira said quietly, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. Alpha Blackwood is first blood, Bryn asked. Amara and Mira exchanged glances. Finally, Amara spoke. It's what we call the original werewolf bloodline. The first wolves weren't bitten or turned. They were born from ancient magic, created to guard the boundary between the human world and something else. Kale mentioned he was descended from them, but he didn't explain. Because it makes him a target, Mira interrupted. First blood wolves are stronger, faster, and they have abilities other shifters don't. They can force partial transformations. They can command lesser wolves with just their presence. Bryn's mind reeled. Kale is 93 years old, Amara said gently. Though he only looks 30, first blood wolves age differently. They reach maturity and then stop. 93. The man who'd kissed her in the garden, who'd confessed his fears and held her face like she was precious. He'd lived nearly a century. Had loved and lost across decades she couldn't imagine. Because he wanted you to see him as just a man, Mira said. Not as a legend or a prize to be won. Marcus knows what Kyle is, which is why he's so desperate to defeat him. If he can kill First Blood in combat, his status will skyrocket. Bryn's voice cracked on the question. Amara's expression was troubled. In a fair fight? No. But Marcus doesn't fight fair. He'll have plans, contingencies. A knock on the door made them all jump. Amara opened it to reveal Dr. Carver, her silver hair windswept, her expression grave. Bryn, she said. Kale wants to see you. Bryn's heart lurched. The Northern Tower. Dr. Carver's eyes were kind but sad. Go. The tower was ancient stone and winding stairs that left Bryn breathless by the time she reached the top. She pushed open the heavy wooden door to find Kyle standing by the open window, moonlight painting him in silver and shadow. He turned when he heard her, and the expression on his face nearly broke her, vulnerable, terrified, desperate. You came, he said, like he'd doubted she would. Bryn crossed to him, and he pulled her into his arms with a force that stole her breath. She wrapped herself around him, feeling his heart racing against her cheek. Kale, they told me about your bloodline. He pulled back just enough to cup her face, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. Because I wanted one person in this world to see me as just Kyle. Not as first blood, not as a prize or a threat or a legend, just... Bryn rose on her toes, bringing their foreheads together. I see a man who's survived impossible things, who protects people who can't protect themselves, who stayed up all night to make sure I felt safe. Her name was a prayer and a plea. Tomorrow, when I fight Marcus, there's a chance I won't win. Not because he's stronger, but because he'll cheat. She pressed her fingers to his lips. Don't you dare say goodbye. You're going to win. You're going to survive. The words came out fierce, feral, surprising them both. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure everyone knows what he did. But you're not going to die, Kale. His laugh was broken. No, I just got you. Kale's eyes searched hers, and something in his expression shifted, became determined, almost fierce. Then I won't go. I'll fight like hell to come back to you. Bryn pulled him down and kissed him with all the desperation and hope and terror swirling in her chest. He responded instantly, his hands tangling in her hair, his mouth moving against hers like he was memorizing the taste of her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kale rested his forehead against hers. I've lived 93 years, he whispered. I've seen centuries of sunrises, traveled the world, led my pack through wars and peace. But these past 3 days with you? Tears burned Bryn's eyes. Don't make me cry. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her nose, gentle touches that felt like benedictions. And whatever happens tomorrow, know that meeting you changed everything. They stayed in the tower until dawn painted the sky pink and gold, wrapped in each other's arms, neither willing to acknowledge that sunrise meant the full moon was only hours away. Finally, reluctantly, Kyle walked her back to her room. At her door, he kissed her one more time, slow and deep and full of promise. Stay safe tomorrow, he said. Lock yourself in with Mira. Don't open the door for anyone but me or Dr. I will. Bryn touched his face one more time. As he walked away, Bryn pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart race with fear and hope in equal measure. Tomorrow, everything would change. She just prayed they'd both survive it.